Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
The culture is collapsing around us. Will anybody stand up for civilization? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. We are now in the midst of a cultural revolution, plain and simple. It's now conventional wisdom that the U.S. is guilty of not just racism, but systemic racism, meaning the system is rigged against people because they are black. We will examine this proposition from multiple angles. LibertyNation.com national columnist and Heartland correspondent Sarah Cowgill joins us to discuss the disbelief among workaday Americans about what they're seeing in the streets. And we'll discuss who the true culprits are for the systemic racism in urban police departments. Spoiler alert, it's not Republicans. Plus, we will do something the progressives refuse to do, present the full truth about the history of slavery. And LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Coe breaks down a couple of significant Supreme Court decisions this week which could strengthen transgender rights and weaken the Second Amendment.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We commence the proceedings with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out a virtual assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. This wailing and gnashing of teeth over the George Floyd affair is at one level understandable among rank-and-file citizens who do not obsess over politics and race and were appalled by the slow-motion execution of an unarmed man accused of passing a counterfeit $20 bill. But the immediate aftershock should have calmed down enough for those elected to stand up for the rule of law to, well, do exactly that. But instead, we see a succession of earnest-sounding, butt-covering statements, often stipulating to the truth of systemic racism, and disclaimers from both sides saying essentially, hey, I'm not like those racist conservatives, not me. I'm upright on all matters racial. Where are the voices standing up for Western civilization? Yes, Western civilization. Folks, how about a quick reality check? We fought a civil war over slavery, the only nation ever to do so. About 1 million Americans, the equivalent of more than 10 million today, including 600,000 soldiers, lost their lives in a twilight struggle against slavery. Oceans of blood, sweat, and tears have been expended on the civil rights movement, which produced concrete change. Affirmative action led to guaranteed preferential treatment for blacks in the workplace. We elected a black president. And then, even though he was not altogether popular, we re-elected him. Does this signal a system rotten to its racist core? The broad mass of public opinion, if not simple common sense, tells us that black lives not only matter, but should have value equal to all others. But while many conservatives are shaking with fear at responding to all this madness, the president is not. Donald Trump seems to be the only one willing to speak clearly and forcefully against the precipitous rise of forces seeking to take a jackhammer to the American project. He announced an executive order on police this week that will ban chokeholds, enforce independent credentialing of cops, and offer incentives for local departments to bring on experts in mental health and addiction and homelessness as co-responders to help the police. Here's how he framed it.
Reducing crime and raising standards are not opposite goals. They are not mutually exclusive. They work together. They all work together. That is why today I'm signing an executive order encouraging police departments nationwide to adopt the highest professional standards to serve their communities.
But as Trump tries to process and make sense of all the mayhem surrounding him, even though he had nothing to do with COVID-19 or the Floyd killing or the nationwide protests that followed, the left continues their endless virtue signaling on race, which we're used to by now. But we never really get used to hypocrisy, do we? And Virginia Governor Ralph Northam took it to a new level this week. You would think the man who has come to be known as Governor Blackface following the release of his old yearbook page with a guy in blackface and another in a KKK hood, would lay low. But instead, he actually went on NBC this week and acted like the picture with the blackface and the KKK hood was just a big nothing, and then proceeded to lecture the nation.
We've had 2 very thorough investigations, and those investigations showed no evidence of me being in the picture. But I will tell you, Jeff, this isn't about me anymore. This is really about Virginia. It's about this country. It's about black oppression. It's about systemic racism. What I didn't realize and what I have learned is really that black oppression exists here, is alive and well in 2020.
The absence of shame is breathtaking, isn't it? But Northam's fellow Virginian, Senator Tim Kaine, you may remember him as Hillary Clinton's running mate, might have been even worse when he took to the floor of the United States Senate and said this.
The first African Americans into the English colonies came to Point Comfort, Virginia in 1619. They were slaves. They'd been captured against their will, but they landed in colonies that didn't have slavery. There were no laws about slavery in the colonies at that time. The United States didn't inherit slavery from anybody. We created it.
That is a lie of biblical proportions. In fact, if Tim Kaine would pick up a Bible, he'd see slavery goes back not just centuries, but millenniums or millennia to biblical times. Slavery operated in the first civilizations in Mesopotamia, dating back to 3500 BC. Slavery was common in much of Europe during the Middle Ages, continued there for centuries. The Ottoman Wars in Europe for 600 or 700 years before America existed resulted in the capture of large numbers of Christian slaves. Don't hear anything about that, do you? And a number of West African kingdoms played a prominent role in the Atlantic slave trade, especially after 1600, the exact form of slavery that the left is decrying these days. But Tim Kaine and his fellow travelers on the left claim the United States of America created slavery. And speaking of lies and hypocrisy, we've got more of both. How about Joe Biden, who calls Trump a racist and stands by as Confederate statues are torn down by Antifa and the other anarchists? But when you've been a professional politician for over 40 years, your words often come back to haunt you.
The senator made a very moving and eloquent speech as a son of the Confederacy, acknowledging that it was time to change and yield to a position not granting a federal charter to a organization made up of many fine people who continue to display the Confederate flag.
Many fine people? Many fine people? Isn't that what the Trump deranged progressives accused Trump of saying about the white supremacists in the infamous Charlottesville episode? But true to form on the left, that was a lie of monstrous proportions, since Trump specifically condemned the white supremacists and said some of the people simply trying to protect history were very fine people. But facts no longer matter on the left. Narrative is everything. Put another way, if you've got facts on one side and you've got narrative on the other, even if it's entirely untrue, go with the narrative, because you can be sure you'll receive more than adequate protection from a legacy media bent on taking down Trump by any means which avail themselves. Facts be damned. But facts, not narrative, are what were delivered in a YouTube video this week that went viral of a black woman, Beverly Beatty, schooling a bunch of idealistic, uninformed white progressives on a street corner on the true history of slavery, racism, and the Democratic Party.
These Democrats, and I'm sorry to say this, I'm not trying to be racist, but they hate black people. These are the same people who fought to keep slavery in. These are the same people who built the KKK. These are the same people who hated us from the beginning. The Republican Party is the party of the blacks. Blacks free, the Republican Party is the only party that the black people actually assisted in finding. But all of that history has been torn away. People say, oh, there was this big switch. There was never a big switch. So what happened was once slavery was abolished in the South, the people in the South could no longer make their money from slaves. They had to move to the North to work in the industry to produce. And so the people in the North that already had established themselves in the industry moved to the South. And so that's where it was a transfer of people coming from the South to the North and people coming from the North to the South. There was never a big switch. So the same Democrats who hated black people from the beginning are the same ones who hate us now. And they use our cause. How did Black Lives Matter turn into something about LGBTQ? When blacks really don't support that. We're conservative. We're really not about that. Not only that, we don't support abortion. We're about working. This is the black culture. We ain't ever been about that. Not only that, we're not about feminism. No, we're not. Black women marry their husbands and respect their husbands. That's what we on. We're not on this, oh, I do what I want. We don't do that. That's not our community.
Well, now that I saved you hours of slaving over dusty history books with that concise and actually accurate summation of slavery in the Democratic Party, you're welcome.